Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. Thank you as always for joining us. I tell you, we are buried in lawsuits against the deep state, court rulings. We're getting ready for the Supreme Court. Judicial Watch is as busy as ever. But before I do a deep dive into some of our recent victories and new lawsuits and disclosures, I want to give you an up-to-date as to what is going on here in Washington, D.C. that you need to take action on. First up is this big battle in Washington over spending related to the Department of Homeland Security. The Democratic Party, the left, has decided they want to essentially use a spending bill that would provide support for DHS through the end, I think, of the fiscal year, to mandate or extract changes to how ICE enforces the law with respect to deportations. And they have a laundry list of demands, and I'm not going to go through each of the demands, other than to say the core demand requires what they say is a judicial warrant, essentially a level of specificity if there's going to be any targeting of any individual for deportation. Now, to get a judicial warrant to deal with, in order to deal with deportations for tens of millions of foreign invaders, essentially tells the Trump administration and America that there'll be no more deportations, because they put in essentially a poison pill into our deportation law, which currently allows for immigration judges who are employees of the executive branch to consider any challenges or concerns related to deportations and then take actions and sign off on warrants authorizing detention and deportation of an individual. That's what the law allows for. So when they say you need a judicial warrant, the left is just making up requirements that have nothing to do with the law. So to make things impossible in terms of enforcement of the law with respect to detaining and deporting illegal aliens in the interior of the United States, they want to add a judicial warrant requirement, which in effect would mean that no one gets deported. So the left currently is demanding a bill out of Congress aligned with their support for DHS funding that would turn the entire nation into a sanctuary for illegal alien invaders. Once you're over the border, or if you're here currently illegally, you will have zero chance of being deported under the left Democrat scheme to hamstrung everyone who is trying to enforce the rule of law in very dangerous circumstances in places like Minneapolis or anywhere else. And tied to all of this is the Republican pushback. They're thinking of pushing again, whether it's tied to DHS spending or not is another matter. I don't know where we stand on that, but there are going to be key votes on this issue coming up related to election integrity. The Republicans have been kicking around a bill. The Senate hasn't acted on it in months. Evidently, they wanted to, the new reason is they wanted the House to strengthen it again. So there's going to be a vote on the bill soon in the House and then presumably in the Senate. And what would the bill do? The key elements of the bill are a national voter ID, so states wouldn't be able anymore to conduct federal elections without requiring voter ID in order to vote, and citizenship verification in order to register to vote. These two elements, poll after poll have shown, are supported by upwards of 85% of American citizens. So this isn't an issue that divides Republicans and Democrats. This isn't an issue that divides people by race in terms of policy preferences or any other sort of demographic change, the demographic differences on policy issues. Everyone agrees except the radical left, and I guess Democratic Party machine operatives, to be blunt, that this is necessary for secure elections. voter ID, and citizenship verification. Those are the two core issues of the SAVE Act that is the Senate may not vote on at all, or may not pass in the Senate at all. In the House, it's still going to be close. So this is what you need to do. At least this is what I would do. If I were a voter and I were concerned about these issues, I would call. I'd call the House. I'd call my representative in the House, find out who he is or she is. And don't worry, if they're Democrats, you should call them too. And you call your senators. So find out who your senators are. And all you need to do is call the Capitol Hill switchboard. There are a few numbers. The one I kind of have memorized is 202-225-3121. And someone's going to answer and say, how may I help you? There may be now AI trees or something that help you get to where you need to go. But just ask for your congressman, ask for your senators. So 3 phone calls. You can also call the local offices of each senator and congressman as well in your congressional district or in your state, so you pick. But communicate your views as to whether they should pass DHS funding with a poison pill. But I guess poison pill isn't the right word. Poison pill usually makes it so that a vote will obviously never succeed. But with something that is so objectionable as to destroy our ability to enforce immigration law. And then secondly, whether or not Congress should finally pass something that's sorely needed, a national voter ID and citizenship verification. Voter ID is necessary, but it's not sufficient because non-citizens have the ID in many cases, if they're already registered to vote illegally or improperly or however, to vote. So they could live in a voter ID state, but because they've registered, because the only way, the registration right now, all it does is it requires a personal attestation on, and if you falsely sign, you're potentially subject to prosecution, but no one checks your documents to make sure you're a citizen. So call your members of Congress about whether to support voter ID and citizenship verification, and whether or not to protect the minimum work we need to do to enforce our immigration law. The left wants to turn the entire United States, not just Minneapolis, not just New York City, not just LA or California. They want to turn the whole country into a sanctuary for illegal aliens, making it nearly impossible to enforce the law, detain, and deport them as is required. And because millions need to be detained and deported. So call your members of Congress and your senators at 202-225-3121, 202-225-3121 to share your views on these important issues. And I say that, I'm not telling you what to say. Be polite, be firm, but remember, they're just typically junior staffers, but they do track who calls. And you may say, well, if the person, let's say you're a Republican and you live in a blue state, you've got 2 Democrat senators, Democrat representatives, still call and share your views. They do take note of the opposition in the state, and they kind of calculate their views and modify their views and their rhetoric based on what they're hearing from home. And even if the phone doesn't get answered, still call. Because the phones ring. They do know if there's a lot of people calling simply by the volume of calls and the ringing of the phones in the offices. Now, I know a lot of people might tell you, it's a waste of time to call your members of Congress. That is not true. I've been in this town longer than I care to admit to. It is a useful barometer for the members as to what the public is concerned about. So get on the horn. If you're concerned about election integrity, call your senators, call your congressmen. Get on the horn if you're concerned about basic immigration enforcement. Because on the immigration enforcement side, let me be clear here, There are many, many Republicans, and I'm sure there are a few people in the Trump administration who want to dial it back, right? They don't like the way the liberal media is spinning this. They think they're kind of losing on some of the messaging. And so there's a lot of pressure to dial back the deportation efforts, the reversal of the Biden invasion. And so if you don't want that to happen, you gotta do what you gotta do in our system, which is communicate your concerns as a voter and a citizen to your elected representatives. Oh, and by the way, reaffirm or oppose or do whatever you want at the state and local level if your local community or your state representatives or government is also engaged in the sanctuary lawlessness that's endangering lives all over the country. So these are kind of crucial issues, and it's likely to be some of the more important votes the House and the Senate take prior to the election, because not much is going to get done with an upcoming congressional election. So these are one of these few moments, at least this year, where your voice may make a difference. The other big news this week is the further release of millions of Epstein records as a result of a bill passed overwhelmingly by Congress requiring their release and signed by President Trump. And what's interesting about it is it shows the public interest in the Epstein matter remains significant. New revelations about Prince Andrew. There's the government of the UK, the left-wing government of the UK, may collapse because one of its key behind-the-scenes guy, actually who was U.S. ambassador to the United States, turned out, has a shady relationship, it looks like, according to the emails with Epstein. So there are a lot of people having to answer tough questions, including Obama's former White House counsel and people like that about their relationship to Epstein as disclosed in this material. What I think is interesting, though, is they've released this material and people are complaining, well, there's been too many withholdings or there hasn't been enough withholdings because the volume has been so much the government obviously made a mistake in the withholdings. Concurrently, we have a FOIA lawsuit for the Epstein records. So the irony is they've released millions of records on this website. They're telling us in the Epstein lawsuit, we're still looking for records, and they still haven't given us one record. So it's very interesting to see what the intersection eventually is going to be between this massive release of information and through it, and if there are withholdings that people don't like, there's no way to challenge them. The only way to do that is through the FOIA law, at least currently. And so it's a kind of a curious situation. And it shows you that there's a significant public interest in government transparency, especially about the perception of corruption at the highest levels of government. And President, I don't know if you saw the news as well, former President Bill Clinton and Hillary were facing contempt proceedings in the House. The committee passed resolution of contempt because they refused to cooperate and come as requested under subpoena for questioning about their links to Epstein. And it looked like the contempt resolution was going to pass in the full House, and they were going to be facing, I would presume, prosecution for their contempt of Congress. Well, lo and behold, they thought better of their political resistance to this legal proceeding, which is, I know it's political in Congress, but it's had significant consequences, as Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro found out. And they are going to testify about Epstein and who knows what else. I would encourage House questioners to be pretty fulsome in their questioning and be pretty broad in their understanding as to what is potentially tied to Epstein and the Clintons. So that's going to be interesting. But I just wanted to give you the brief that, yeah, I know they're releasing a lot of documents, but we don't know what they haven't released, And of the material they've released, what are they withholding and why? And there's got to be accountability for that. And because of Judicial Watch's FOIA lawsuit, we are well placed to do so. So I'll give you updates as, I don't think there's been an update from the FBI and Justice Department about this recently. You know, we've sued the CIA for Epstein records, still no word as to when or if we're going to get documents from them. So this release doesn't even address all the key issues as it relates to Epstein because it's only one agency that's releasing records. What does the State Department have on Epstein, for example? What does the CIA have on Epstein? What does Treasury have on Epstein? You know, Epstein was a very, very active person in Wall Street and such. So there's, and these documents show there's a there. You know, given his behavior, I think people want accountability for people who were dealing with it, dealing with him as if he was a regular guy. And it looks like, aside from his personal behavior, not his personal behavior, his criminal behavior, you had people, like I said, this government official in England, you know, top official for Tony Blair. He was a top official for the current government, the current left-wing government. You know, they were engaged in criminal conduct potentially aside and separate from the allegations and the crimes related to rape and pedophilia and all that. I wish Congress would pass more bills mandating disclosure of records about issues of public concern. I really do. Make our jobs a lot easier. So this is why I've got I probably can't get to them all. I think I have nearly 10 FOIA lawsuits I want to tell you about. So first up, in terms of our FOIA developments, Judicial Watch was able to, thanks to finally the cooperation of the Trump Justice Department, able to obtain the list or rosters of key employees who were working for Jack Smith. We have been fighting for years over this. We asked for the records. Long story short is we got a phone list, or a phone list was disclosed as being available of people who were working for Jack Smith. We said, give us that phone list. That's a pretty good list of people that we can use to figure out who was doing what for Jack Smith in terms of who they are. And once you know who they are, you can see if there are issues related to their involvement that's inappropriate given their backgrounds. The Biden administration refused to give us the list, saying it was a phone list was compiled for law enforcement purposes. Unfortunately, a court agreed with them, so we appealed. And the Trump Justice Department correctly determined that maybe it's not a good idea to defend the privacy interests of the Jack Smith gang, pretending that we can't find out who Jack Smith had working for him in senior positions as he was trying to jail President Trump and countless others, harassing them, targeting senators and congressmen with spying on their phone activity and things like that, harassing me. Of course, I knew who some of the prosecutors were because I had 3 of them question me, believe it or not, in a grand jury. Although to be fair, I forget their names. I do remember one of the names. So they decided to give us the records. And so this is the first official list of records showing who was working for Jack Smith. Is it the complete list? No, it is not. But no one else has gotten the list of people working for Jack Smith officially. And Judicial Watch has. Thank you to Pam Bondi and her team for seeing reason and agreeing to this transparency. And this is what the list, let me go to the press release here. So we had asked for staff rosters, phone lists, or similar records depicting all employees hired by or detailed to the Office of Special Counsel Jack Smith. Now, you know, the government always comes back and say, oh, we can't tell you the poor FBI agents who are working for us or the assistants and the researchers. I'm like, well, we don't want the assistants or researchers. I don't think the FBI agents should be withheld from us. But, you know, I think the courts have kind of moved on from that. They've decided the FBI has special protections no other agency does, certainly at the law enforcement level. But they said that top government officials who were working for Smith, they had privacy interests. And like I said, this was a law enforcement sensitive document. So we got the document. And here's the unredacted document, or excuse me, partly redacted document. And this is what it looks like. Let's bring it up. Okay, so this first group, these are the FBI people on the phone list. So all of the B6 is B7C. Those are codes for privacy. That's the reason they're being withheld. And here's the other material that has finally been released. This is the list of names, some of whom we know, like Joseph Cooney, Jay Bratt. So a few of these names we figured out from court filings, but some we didn't. So this is a more complete list of those who were working for Jack Smith. I think there's more material to be released. We may be pursuing more material, but it's a significant victory. And it's a shame that it took, I don't know how long it took. Let's see, when did we file the lawsuit? Yeah, we filed it in 2023. And it took almost, I think we got this maybe in December. So it took almost a year to get the records out of the Trump administration. But we got them. Given the records that are being withheld, we'll take anything we get, because don't get me started about what's still being withheld. You know, and the thing is, we had received, you know, similar information without the bric-a-brac from the Mueller operation. We had gotten names of the people who were working there, you know, showing overwhelmingly that that the team was leftist and Democrat and anti-Trump in orientation. You know, but then we asked for records about Jack Smith, and we're told that a senior prosecutor has a privacy interest in trying to jail the president, and their name shouldn't be disclosed. Raiding the home of a president, stealing his Twitter information. Oh yeah, through court process, so it's not technically stealing, but you know what I think of that. Judicial Watch overcame a wall of resistance. We pushed through the stone wall to get the names of the attorneys helping rogue prosecutor Jack Smith in his attempt to upend our republic. We are pleased that the Bondi Justice Department finally stopped defending the indefensible. It took a while to get them to stop, and turned over these rosters to Judicial Watch and the American people. So you could take a look at the names, you can research their giving and their history, and you know, but it's information. I don't want to condemn anyone there, but there's going to be more information coming out about these individuals, and in a way that I think is going to highlight how abusive the Jack Smith operation was. And as I said, we still have many pending FOIA lawsuits and requests about the Lawfare targeting Trump, Arctic Frost, which is the name given the initial investigation, outrageously targeting Trump for non-crimes, the Jack Smith operation that followed, all sorts of other lawsuits as well, and we're just getting the runaround from the Justice Department and the FBI. And it's really not acceptable. I can say it's not acceptable, but that doesn't get me the documents. But we don't just complain, we are in court fighting for the information. So at least they're being held accountable for hiding the records in court, but it would be better just to get the records directly. You know, if they spend as much energy, or even 1/10 of the energy, or even a 1% of the energy, disclosing records through FOIA on these issues, that they are, we'd be a lot better off as a country, and I think there'd be much more significant accountability results, because if the people know what went on and how awful it was, there would be more political movement and pressure for full accountability through prosecutions. Don't you agree? I mean, look at everything we're doing here. This is it's worth highlighting. I kind of said it generally. We sued the Justice Department regarding the FBI's Public Corruption Unit's investigation of Donald Trump, called Arctic Frost. Just last month, we sued the Justice Department for FBI agents harassing Peter Navarro. Sued the Justice Department for FBI records about a top FBI official's communications with a left-wing front group that was helping organize the prosecutorial efforts targeting Trump. Another lawsuit for Arctic Frost. We sued in Arizona for Chris Mays', who's the Attorney General, her communications with the Jack Smith operation, because we believe there was coordination between the Justice Department, Jack Smith, and the various left-wing prosecutors who are abusing their offices to target Americans for daring to dispute the election. And then misconduct allegations against Smith and his team. We asked for records there. And then, of course, we still have an ongoing fight with Fani Willis. We've been successful in part, but still we're pushing to get records released that they're still hiding, despite the case being completely over. There's literally no one in town doing more to uncover the lawfare abuses targeting Trump than Judicial Watch. And yes, I include Congress in that regard. So great victory for the rule of law here, and hopefully we'll get more. We had another important victory this week. The Tennessee Court of Appeals ordered release of the Covenant school shooting records. And we've been fighting this issue for, I think, 3 years now. And we finally got some justice in terms of transparency on that terrible shooting. You remember when that the girl who said, I think she was transgender, went in and shot up the school. You know, just terrible, terrible shooting deaths that occurred as a result, killing 3 adults and 3 children. And we quickly asked for, and then when we got the runaround, sued for records about what went on. And we represented a retired Hamilton County Sheriff, James Hammond, and the Tennessee Firearms Association in doing so. So we quickly filed the request and then sued. We didn't file the request, but they did, and we sued to find out what was going on. Because in cases like this, if there's politics, it interferes with the release of information. And in this case, as per usual, you have the anti-gun nuts come in and say we can't have guns because of a terrible mass shooting death, and the Constitution be danged, you don't get to keep your guns anymore. And on top of that, there's a political interest in minimizing a transgender-related violence that occurs, as evidently did here. And not only that, as we proceeded with the litigation, we had the families intervene and other interests intervene to try to assert completely new theories of law that weren't really supported by anything in state law to keep the records that ordinarily would have been released and should have been released long ago from being released. And unfortunately, the court bought into virtually every argument to hide the records, so we didn't get much of anything. Even the excuse that there was an ongoing investigation, the person was dead, the investigation was closed, we still couldn't get records because there were all these other excuses. So the two plaintiffs, several plaintiffs, so there were several parties seeking records. We appealed the lower court decisions, We appealed it once, won a particular issue, went back, and then she withheld all the records, the court did. So we appealed it, and we got a massive decision that was a big victory for transparency in Tennessee, and I hope it guides an approach to FOIA in other areas as well. And as I note, the appeals court rejected every basis behind the lower court's unprecedented decision to keep the records secret. The court held that the police investigation file is a public record. I mean, we had to fight about whether it was a public record. That the ongoing investigation rationale for hiding the records is now moot, M-O-O-T, meaning overtaken by events, it's no longer true, as the investigation is over. That the court incorrectly imposed a blanket secrecy rule based on speculative school security or copycat crime concerns. So there was a concern that what the shooter wrote might encourage other shooters. Well, that's never been held to be a reason for withholding information. A, it's completely speculative, and when you look at what she wrote, it's very disturbing, and you can easily make the case that if you know someone is saying or thinking things like this and you're aware of it, you should be concerned. And it could actually help stop other mass shootings. And in terms of security at the school, there's a big fight about whether security at the school but the security measures at the school should not be publicly disclosed. I'm like, that's fine. Don't disclose them. So that was not even an issue from our purposes, as best I understood it legally. And it also ruled that federal copyright law does not overwrite the Public Records Act, because there was this convoluted way of copyrighting the shooter's manifesto or notes or whatever notebook, because we're not sure, because we haven't seen the documents yet. And we've seen them in part, but I'll tell you more about that later. So someone like, let's say Lee Harvey Oswald writes a diary, and the family copyrights it, even though the diary is in the control of law enforcement, no one can see it? Come on. The court rejected that. So you can have a copyright, but it's not going to preempt public disclosure of these records. So what's going to happen next is that limited redactions, as I described, maybe school security issues. Now redactions are, the blacked out material, the material we won't see. So that might apply now, but complete secrecy, that's out, including the shooter's writings, and that's unlawful. And the court wants to move it along. The appeals court wrote, the trial court has discretion to prescribe additional procedures as necessary to govern the proceedings on remand. What does that mean? Remand means we're sending it back down to the lower court to, implement our decision. And you can't withhold the records, so now you got to let them out. The entire process should be concluded as expeditiously as possible, because almost 3 years have passed since the first request for this information. We encourage the trial court to impose upon the police an expedited schedule for completion of its review of the requested public records. Now, ironically, or not, I guess ironically isn't the right word, but separately we had filed lawsuits against the Justice Department, or a lawsuit against the Justice Department, for what they had in terms of the records. And as a result, we've gotten 2 productions. I've talked about them previously. They're available on our website. You can go to the link below for the press release, and there'll be links within it. And the records are terrible. They're awful. I didn't, or Judicial Watch didn't quote them in any significant way. We just said they're terrible, and they're available for people if they want to look at them. I mean, they were that awful. And there's probably more awful information, but there could be information that could help protect people. I mean, for example, I recall from the records that the shooter selected the school in part because she considered it to be less secure than another area. I think it was a mall that had better security. So what is the conclusion from that? Visible security can help protect locations like schools. Visible, apparent, armed security can protect schools. You wouldn't know that, but it makes sense, but it's further affirmed and dramatically, however devastatingly so, given the deaths that resulted, those 6 innocents who murdered, including 3 babies. If we didn't have access to those records. Once again, Judicial Watch's expert persistence in court achieved a transparency breakthrough on the awful Covenant School shooting. The public has a right to know fully how and why this terrible shooting took place. So it's a victory. Am I happy? No, I'm not happy. It's a terrible situation. I'm frustrated we had to fight 3 years for documents that should have been released in the ordinary course. And, you know, sometimes you ask for documents you don't even want to see, but it's important that the public has access to them, right? And these are one of those circumstances. But if you've got kids in school or you're concerned about some of these public policy debates I talked about and how they intersect with this mass killing, these records are partly available on our website as it is, but will be mostly available because the redactions will be limited. We're going to be getting police records for the first time in large measure as to what they found, motivations, who knew what and when, you know, everything you might want to know. And hopefully it will be, it will help the public better protect itself from threats like this in the future. So an important development in that regard. So just so you know, Judicial Watch has the #1 freedom of information litigation investigation operation in the world. Not just in the United States, in the world. No one does more FOIA investigations and litigation than Judicial Watch. So as a result, we have lawsuits going out on topics far and wide, important topics here in Washington, D.C., topics in states, and I want to go through a few of those with you today. I talked about earlier this update how Judicial Watch is focused on exposing as much as it can about the scope and abuse of the lawfare targeting President Trump and countless other innocent Americans. We just had to sue again the FBI because it's refusing to release records about one of its core units involved in this operation against Trump. Judicial Watch announced that it filed a FOIA lawsuit for FBI records regarding the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Public Corruption Unit's investigation of Donald Trump, codenamed Arctic Frost. Now, as I described to you earlier, Arctic Frost is an insult to President Trump. It's a type of orange. So Orange Man is bad, so they named the code name targeting him Arctic Frost. That's how unprofessional the Biden Justice Department and FBI were. And now the FBI is hiding records about this lawfare scheme against Trump, unprecedented in scope. Now the FBI pretends, oh, you know, they objected to some of what they were trying to do to Trump raiding his home. Well, the FBI raided his home in the end. Are you aware of FBI agents leaving the FBI over the abuses of Trump? I'm not. So I want to know the full scope of what they were up to and what they were talking about and what they were doing when they were violating the civil rights of President Trump, countless other Americans, and trying to upend our republic. We had to file the lawsuit because they ignored our request we filed back in October for the field office's public corruption unit, the Washington field office of the FBI's public corruption unit, their investigative reports on the operation. Judicial Watch approvals for the investigative steps or techniques, so who in the Justice Department was running this operation. Because remember, it wasn't always Jack Smith. Like when the FBI came to my home to harass me with a subpoena, the day I got back from skin cancer surgery, I'm lying around recovering from the surgery, and I get a knock at the door at night, 6:30 at night, and 2 FBI agents are handing me a subpoena. That was the Biden Justice Department. That was the Biden FBI at the time. And then Jack Smith took up the subpoena and further harassed and abused me with an absurd grand jury appearance and doubled down and issued subpoenas to Judicial Watch. So the DOJ involvement with this special corruption unit or anti-corruption unit, it's really corruption unit because the unit itself was corruptly operating. And so we want to know the Justice Department and Jack Smith. Of course, Jack Smith is the Justice Department. He's about as independent as Jill Biden is from the Biden administration. I mean, it's all one and the same. You know, the documents show that there was concerns within the FBI about the Mar-a-Lago raid. They didn't think there was a good reason to do a raid. They did it anyway. They were overruled, allegedly. But then FBI Director Wray was right in the middle of it, pushing this Arctic frost garbage. Senior officials at the Justice Department, all of which kind of escalated these investigations after it became known that Biden wanted it done. And as president, Joe Biden can get it done. If he thinks there's a raid, if he thinks laws were violated, he has authority to run the Justice Department's investigations in that regard, either directly or indirectly. The question is, was there a good faith basis to do these investigations? And there wasn't. That's the corruption. No one questions the authority to conduct criminal investigations or direct them out of the White House or Justice Department or FBI. The question is there a good faith basis to conduct the investigations? Is it for the rule of law purposes? Is there any bait? No, they were making up fake crimes to protect themselves from scrutiny for the 2020 election and to protect Hunter and others from scrutiny for criminality. So focus it all on Trump to distract from the 2020 election debacle, the corrupted election, and the corruption of Joe Biden and his family and the Obama gang and all the rest. At least that's my thinking about it. So after some of these revelations about what the FBI was up to were leaked to or produced to the Senate by the FBI under Kash Patel, Kash then abolished this public corruption unit that I'm talking about. All the more reason to get documents about what it was up to. Because if the FBI director didn't trust the Washington field office is either the #1 or #2 field office in the FBI's operation. So you've got headquarters, and then you have field offices. I think there are 55 or so field offices. So the big ones are, I think the 2 biggest ones are probably Washington and New York City. New York may be the biggest one. And so a lot of the work was done at the Washington field office in terms of the harassment of Trump through this public corruption unit. So Cash saw there was enough corruption in order to abolish the unit. That's why we want the documents about the lawfare the unit was conducting on behalf of the Biden gang. So we're fighting for a full account of how the Biden administration weaponized the FBI and other agencies to target Trump. And it's frustrating, as you know what, to have to fight in federal court to get this basic information. Now, it may be asking too much to get them to respond timely enough in order to get the documents. I don't know, maybe I'm being unfair. But tell you, once we sue, it isn't like we get attention. We still don't get the documents. I don't know what's going on at the Justice Department and FBI that, I mean, I shouldn't have to scream from the rafters to get this type of record, these types of records. They know what we do. I mean, it's not like Judicial Watch isn't a known entity over there. As I said, we're the #1 litigator on issues like this. I know the president wants records like this released. And I know many people say, well, maybe they're doing a criminal investigation and they can't release the records. That's not the reason they give us. They just ignore the request. I think in this request, they ignored it. Let me look it up. I'll tell you. Give me a second. Here it is. So here's our press release. We got a nice little link here to the lawsuit. You should read the lawsuit because you'll see what a FOIA lawsuit looks like. I think it's educational. Let's view the lawsuit, the complaint, filed on 1/20/26. So here's the statement of facts. October 7th, we submitted this request. Take a look at that. We're not asking for a lot of records. How many investigative reports were prepared targeting Trump? How many could there be? How were these steps approved? It's an investigation. It's not like the Epstein files. It's a very succinct group of records. And then 3, all the records showing communications with top DOJ and Jack Smith operators. So they gave us a request. So let's go back to the thing. So they responded to our request on October 15th. So we sent the letter, the request on October 7th. So they responded about a week later. That's good. And look at number 7. Plaintiff has received no communication from the FBI since. And this is the kicker, number 8. The FBI has failed to determine whether to comply with the request, notify plaintiff as to any determination and the reasons thereof for. So it's not like they said, oh, you can't have this Judicial Watch. We may be involved in a criminal investigation. We can't tell you one way or the other. I mean, that's an argument they've used before. Advise plaintiff of the right to appeal an adverse determination or produce the requested produce the requested records or otherwise demonstrate the requested records are exempt from production. So at least pay attention to these requests, and there's no excuse for not doing so. I've talked about how all the other requests we're having are, some of these requests go back years in terms of a Trump lawfare, abuses targeting Trump, and we're still getting the runaround. It's exceedingly frustrating. But we're going to keep on keeping on. Another lawsuit. This is an important lawsuit as well. We just filed a lawsuit against the Department of Homeland Security, because Homeland Security and their employees, I'm praying for them really, because they're under terroristic assault and they're in fear for their very lives. And it's not just a theoretical or rhetorical issue. They've been shot at and subject to terrorist attacks. And there was one of those in Texas recently, and we want documents depicting, if they're available, pictures and videos of what happened. So it's, I think, a very important lawsuit. So just last week, Judicial Watch filed the FOIA lawsuit over the request we filed back in July for records about this attack. We specifically asked for all video surveillance footage depicting the attack on the Prairieland ICE detention facility in Alvarado, Texas on or about July 4th. All body-worn camera footage depicting the attack, all photographs depicting the attack. So we just want the videos and photos. Immigration and Customs Enforcement described the incident at the Prairieland Detention Center in Alvarado as a planned ambush. A group of suspects began shooting fireworks at the facility while others damaged vehicles and sprayed graffiti, apparently to lure officers outside. When officers responded, one was shot in the neck. Attackers fired 20 to 30 rounds at unarmed detention officers. Authorities say the suspects intended to kill the corrections officers. Federal grand jury indicted 9 individuals identified by prosecutors as members of Antifa. So this was the left-wing terror network, Antifa, and charged 7 additional people with offenses including rioting, using weapons, explosives, providing material support to terrorists, obstruction, and attempted murder of an Alvarado police officer and unarmed corrections officers at the Prairieland Detention Center. So isn't it interesting how you hear a lot more about what's happening in Minneapolis, where some left-wing lunatic gets detained by officials trying to protect themselves as they try to enforce federal immigration law, and we're supposed to be feeling sorry for that person being detained. How much have you heard about this shooting in Alvarado, Texas? My guess is 50 to 60% of you haven't heard it before. Right? And if you have heard it before, you probably haven't heard it recently. Now, Trump is trying to take on Antifa, labeling it a militarist anarchist enterprise that explicitly calls for the overthrow of the United States government, law enforcement authorities, and our system of law. He designated it a domestic terrorist organization and directed federal law enforcement authorities to use all applicable authorities to investigate, disrupt, and dismantle any and all Antifa-aligned illegal operations. So Judicial Watch is very well acquainted with Antifa. We've been investigating it and studying it for years. We've been sued by Antifa. Yeah, so we were sued by Antifa. We were suing for records of an Antifa operation that resulted in an assault and arrest, I believe, of a teacher, and they sued us, and they were ordered to pay us money in the end. So I love the left. They pretend that Antifa is a theory, right? It's just an idea. Well, the idea sent lawyers to sue us. How does that work? So the point being, we're very much aware of what Antifa has been up to for years, and what happened in Texas was a deeply concerning terrorist attack, and we want the full details on it. And we encourage the administration to give us the documents, give us the videos and photos. And if there's an issue with law enforcement, they can try to protect it under the FOIA, but there's no reason to withhold them in its entirety. And these are the type of records that should be released if they're available. The ambush at the Prairieland ICE facility was a predictable outcome of years of anti-ICE and anti-border security rhetoric. And of course, Antifa has been the point of the spear, in some cases literally, in terms of targeting federal law enforcement with terrorist threats and activities. The media and the radical left repeatedly label ICE agents as racists and kidnappers, and are creating a climate conducive to domestic terrorist attacks by groups like Antifa. So the administration would do well to respond immediately to this lawsuit. You know, we asked for these records. They asked for a bit more time, and that was months ago. We've heard neither hide nor hair from them. And so I'm hoping that the lawsuit gets some attention and gives them a proper and appropriate vehicle to provide this information to the American people about this leftist terrorist attack that nearly killed dozens of people in Texas. Just unbelievable. So I encourage you to go and look up more information about this terrorist assault and ask yourselves, why haven't I heard more about this in the media? Why isn't Congress doing hearings on this? And certainly the administration, I think, should, they've got a lot on their hands, but certainly it's relatively easy to release this type of information out there, especially if the law allows them to do so. So Judicial Watch filed an important new FOIA lawsuit over what is I consider a low-grade fever type of scandal for the left, which is ActBlue, which is a key fundraising platform for left-leaning organizations and political campaigns. You know, you may go to many left-leaning groups. You can just go and click their contribute buttons. They often get pushed through ActBlue, which acts as a platform for contributions, both charitable contributions and political contributions. And there's been a lot of concerns about the potential corruption at ActBlue in terms of managing these contributions. And so Judicial Watch knows the FEC is supposedly looking at this, and we asked for records about it, and we got the proverbial hand to the face. So we filed a lawsuit. We filed the lawsuit against the FEC for, quote, records related to alleged fraudulent donor activities by the Democratic fundraising program ActBlue. Judicial Watch filed the lawsuit in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia after the FEC failed to respond to our FOIA law request back in December for records including reports, audits, or investigations of ActBlue's donor verification processes, donor irregularities, or potential donor fraud. Communications between the FEC's Office of Compliance and any state attorney general's office and the U.S. Department or the U.S. Department of Justice about any of these alleged issues that we're talking about. As I said, ActBlue is a primary fundraising platform for Democratic candidates, political action committees, and progressive causes. It processes billions in small dollar contributions. According to a report last year, and it was a joint interim staff report, Fraud on ActBlue, How the Democrats' Top Fundraising Platform Opens the Door for Illegal Election Contributions. Internal documents show that ActBlue staff and executives failed to take the threat of fraud seriously. ActBlue employees regularly demonstrated an unfounded belief that bad actors are not seeking to fraudulently contribute to Democrat campaigns and causes. For example, ActBlue's training guide for new fraud prevention employees instructed them to look for reasons to accept contributions rather than err on the side of flagging a suspicious donation. Altogether, ActBlue's internal documents and communications paint a damning picture. Despite repeated instances of fraudulent donations to Democrat campaigns and causes from domestic and foreign sources, ActBlue is not demonstrating a serious effort to deter fraud on its platform. At best, its conduct displays a profound disrespect for the principle that only Americans should decide American elections. At worst, it may violate the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971, which states that persons who knowingly accept contributions made by one person in the name of another person may face criminal liability. Now, I recall the Obama gang had a problem with this. They had seemingly large numbers of foreign-based donations or material that suggested the donations were foreign, and they didn't really do much to investigate it or, again, set up a wall to make sure that foreign donations weren't improperly made to the campaigns. And so there have been lots of issues about ActBlue, and all we're asking for, what the records are about this. What are they finding? Is there anything substantial that they can share with us under the law? And as I keep on saying, they don't even give us serious excuses. They ignore or just refuse to answer with documents, as the law requires, our requests. But we're asking these records under federal law. And when every time I say we filed a FOIA lawsuit, that means government officials somewhere are breaking federal law. And unfortunately, FOIA is rarely, you know, I would argue there's potential criminal violations of law related to thwarting FOIA, but no one's ever really pursued them. You know why? Because the Justice Department would probably have to prosecute itself half the time. So this is a big issue. As I say in the release, there are legitimate grave concerns that ActBlue has enabled illegal fundraising. By failing to prevent widespread straw donor schemes and other tactics, it is likely that fraudulent and even foreign source contributions have crept into Democrat campaign coffers. So this is a big deal, big lawsuit. You know, we hear noises about ActBlue, but we want the substance. We want to know what's going on. And if they don't have documents, we know not much is going on and maybe more needs to be done. And this is what Judicial Watch is really excellent at. It's like these issues pop up, and often Republicans raise these issues because they need a story of the week. And they recognize there are millions of Americans who are concerned about them, so they're hoping to get them all enthused for a minute or two, and hopefully they forget about other things Republicans may or may not be doing. And then they drop the ball. Now, what Judicial Watch does is we don't drop the ball. If there's an issue out there that's substantial and worth pursuing, we don't say, well, let's not do it because it happened a week ago, which is what the city does all the time. Oh, that was a week ago. Oh, that was 2 weeks ago. That was last year. We don't want to talk about that anymore. It's, oh, that's old news. We're not going to investigate criminality anymore because it happened before the last election cycle. That's why nothing gets done in this city in terms of accountability. They think if it's not happening today and it's not useful today, they have zero interest in it politically. And when there's zero interest in it politically, the machinery of government doesn't do anything. Congress doesn't do anything. The agencies don't do anything. And that's not Judicial Watch's way. That's why we're persistent. And you know, that's why we end up having to do virtually all the heavy lifting on massive scandals. I mean, you think there's all these news stories about a particular issue and you think, well, there's all these investigations going on. No, 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 no. It's just passing news as far as the swamp is concerned, but not for Judicial Watch because we represent your interests in government accountability and transparency. So ActBlue is on our radar. We've been doing investigations already, but now we have a federal lawsuit about it. So a lot going on at Judicial Watch. I got more I want to tell you about, but I'll wait till next week to share it with you. But in the meantime, I encourage you to support our great work. There's no one doing this breadth and scope of work and getting results that Judicial Watch is. Go to judicialwatch.org, support our great work with a donation. This information that you're seeing here, if you believe it's important to share with others, share it. Like the video, share the video, comment on the video. Do everything you can to make sure this information gets out to your friends, your family, your colleagues, your followers online, wherever. The more you know about what your government's up to, the better off the nation is. And with that, I wish you the best, and I'll see you here next week on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.